What's the biggest plot twist you've seen in real life, viewer edition?
Story 1. My dad unknowingly learned years later he was the alibi for a murder a friend of his committed in the 80s in his hometown. He didn't learn it after found his friend out again, 35 years later, when the guy told him everything that day because he has the right to know. Then my dad confessed it to my mom when he was drunk and crying because he felt guilty for something he never knew, even though it was more justified. I won't say the location, but you can guess it because my country is famous for meats and fubat. For the story. Basically, his friend was dating a girl with an a-hole stepdad. His friend was the son of local farmers at the time and was both his friend and co-worker as well for a while. One day he got called to hang out with them, something which was really odd because it was a Saturday, and Saturdays were the time he went out with his girlfriend. Him and some other guys excused themselves for going to pick up more food and drinks on the road at night. They were late a lot, like 3 or 4 hours, and my dad was worrying a lot about something happening to them. 5 hours later, they came back with another car and some other friends they said they found on the way there and invited. He didn't know it all and went with it as if nothing happened. That is when my dad's point of view of the story ends. Then came what really happened that day. It turns out the a-hole stepdad was the typical 80s abusive dude who is going physical on the mother. A week before that day, his friend starts to notice the girl has some bruises too, but that's when she drops the bombshell. The guy actually AR'd her multiple times through a month without the mother knowing at all either. My dad's friend was boiling at that point, but if he does anything, probably the guy will kill him since he was both ex-military and has guns too. What the girlfriend didn't know was that the guy's father is a relative of a local gang member, since most of them have their business cover up as farmers in my country at the time. He told his cousins and asked what he could do. His cousins took him and told him, get all of the friends you can for the equivalent of a barbecue in my country. We will take care of the rest. They knew the guy was having his butt drunk on Saturday night at a bar, the day my dad's friends spent all day with his girlfriend. So some friends of his waited for the guy with something covering their face and took the guy away in an old beat-up muscle car people know to be used by local gang members. The 5 hours his friends was out was because they all drove to a desolate area the gang members used to soften people out and let my dad's friend beat the crap out of the guy until he was dropped dead. Then they drove him out in one of those beat-up cars and made it look like an accident in one of the rivers. After that, they came back as if nothing happened to their alibi. My dad never suspects anything. The wife didn't report it because of his abuse and only claimed he disappeared. My dad didn't suspect a thing because he left 2 years later to be with my mom. His friend is still married to his girlfriend to this day. The guy's body was never found at all or recognized it, and by that point his body was probably dust or bones. My mom was more mad for her usual BS of my dad lying, but then came to the terms he didn't make anything wrong because he didn't know it. And honestly, learning all the story, it's more than justified since guys like that stepdad would go with a slap on the wrist for being ex-military. My dad feels guilty, but as my mom said, he didn't have to feel bad because he didn't know it, and it was more than justified. Even he wouldn't face any retaliation because nobody cares about the b-hole. Not even his military friend, since there was news about his disappearance at that time, but since there was a distinct hate for military, because this happened between the 72 to 85 military dictatorship in my country, and on top, the guy who was one of those dishonorable discharge disguised as medical leave. Yeah, it took a really long time till the body was found out as a pile of bones and dust lying near a river. The case was long dismissed, and the guy didn't have any other family prior, nor parents alive or relatives to contact. Just a random obituary in a newspaper back in '92 as my dad's friend to him. He at least came to terms that there were beyond his grasp, and it was almost a year before he came to work where we live today. He could simply keep it for himself, but the guilt really ate at him and felt different, even if it was also justified as well. Even more strange because he was also friends with the cousin of his friend, and he knew they're the type of people who make people disappear people around when you're their target. Also, the case was dismissed after 5 years because nobody came forward with anything, and the wife already reported he probably died in a ditch after ending up drunk. Yeah, I don't think that your dad can feel too bad about that because he didn't know about it. Someone else used him as an alibi without his knowledge. And yeah, a scumbag, died because of that alibi, or what, like his death wasn't figured out because of that alibi, maybe. But it's not like that's what your dad chose. Your dad didn't willingly involve himself in this. And so I don't think that he should feel guilty about what happened.
Story 2. Not a major plot twist in the traditional sense, but it's one I think of because it happened relatively recently. Towards the end of his life, my grandpa was still very independent, living on his own in his own little house. He couldn't really go out because of his vision, but otherwise, he took care of everything himself. One day he calls me up and asks for the emergency number for the city. He lived next to a park and water had begun streaming into his yard and his house, flooding his crawl space, so something must have happened. To make things easier, I made the call for him, gave them his contact info, and they sent someone out. Plot twist, there was no flood. Grandpa had Charles Bonnet syndrome, a condition where people with deteriorating vision have visual hallucinations. As I understand it, your brain basically tries to interpret the blurry shapes your eyes are seeing and gets it wrong. We knew about his CB, but this was the first time it caused an incident outside of the family. Though we had a chuckle about it, it must have been embarrassing for him, and I wonder what the city worker thought. Afterward, it really made me think about the stereotype of the crazy old relative and how much of that may be related to neurological rather than physiological symptoms, especially before conditions like CB syndrome were recognized. Rest in peace, Grandpa. Story 3. I used to be friends with this guy most of middle school. We were less than a year apart in age. We were super close, but sadly lost contact when I went to high school. I've encouraged him year after year, but never got to talk to him and had friends tell me he hated me. Lies! Fast forward to my senior year, I'm hanging with my dad at Walmart in the bread aisle. I turn toward the meat section and I see him. I'm like, hold up, wait, huh? We make eye contact, but nothing clicks, so as I leave, I'm like, I miss us being friends. So I finally get Instagram. He gets recommended to me. I make some posts along, hey, don't think I'm stalking you or anything, but I saw you at Walmart. He messages back, we chat for hours. The very next day we meet up, talk even more, etc. He ends up kissing me. We get together. We've been dating and living together happily for 2 years now. We're 18 and 19.
I love a good happy ending to a story, and this one put quite the little smile on my face. Good for you. I'm glad that, you took the chance to, make contact and all that kind of stuff. That's great. And why did your friends say that he hates you? Were they just guessing, or what was going on there? I really would love to know, but I also do have to say that it is very interesting that you saw your future husband years later at Walmart in the meat section. I guess you could call that a real meat cute, huh? I'll go.
Story 4. Some years back, I was dating a guy. We were pretty serious, practically living together. He was in the military and stationed in my town. He told me about his super crazy ex, who was the mother of his child. I really thought she was insane when she hired a PI to follow us and take pictures. He told me that he was being deployed to Iraq and communication was spotty due to bombings. Turns out he was stationed in Belgium the whole time with his wife and daughter. I found out he was married to her and very much still with her when she called me at work. He told me later that the reason he moved in with her was so that she wouldn't ream him in a divorce since she had pics of us. He told me that he was in a war zone so that I would be less likely to move on since I would be very worried about him. That was how I found out that emotional abuse is a real thing. I just wish his wife had called me sooner. Story 5. My whole life, I grew up with just my mom and I because my dad died when I was 2. My mom died last year, and I found out after her funeral that my dad actually died 14 years later than my mom said. They got divorced when I was 2, and I actually had 7 siblings from my dad's side, and I'm only the second youngest of his kids. My cousin actually grew up with one of my half-siblings, and I had even met a different one of them in college without ever realizing it. My mom had just said he was dead since he never visited me after the divorce, and she had changed our last names to a unique one. My dad was my aunt's boyfriend when they met, and my mom technically stole her sister's boyfriend. My mom had just sworn the entire family to secrecy, and everyone older than me knew and just never told me. I found this all out afterwards from my cousin and my half-sister who had just happened to be in town at the time. To add more to this craziness, shortly before they divorced, the apartment my mom and dad were living in burned down due to a pot my dad left burning. After the fire was put out and investigated, the police opened up an investigation because the police found out that shortly before the fire, my dad had taken out an insurance policy for my mom and my 2-year-old self, but not himself. The case was closed, I'm guessing, due to lack of evidence. Story 6. Wow, the pub story. I have the same from my grandfather. I learned it from my mother when we went to his second wife's funeral. When he was married to my grandmother, he went every Friday to the golf club. Turns out he was actually having dinner with my great-grandfather and his mistress, who would soon be his second wife. Fun fact, his second wife was my mother's best friend's cousin. That's how my mother learnt about the divorce even before my grandmother. One day, her best friend came to her all excited and asked her how she felt about her cousin marrying my grandfather. My grandfather is such a great guy, only my mother kept contact with him after the divorce. When his second wife died, he asked my mother to try and bring my uncle and my aunt to the funeral. They refused. When my mother told my grandfather, he told her my grandmother should have aborted. Yeah, antagonized the only child that still keeps in touch with you. I had more respect for his wife, which is why I went to her funeral, than I have for him. Talking to him is a chore. Good thing I only have to do it only once a year.
Ugh. Okay, I'm sorry. Yeah, Grandpa, you deserve to be alone with stuff like that. Like, very supportive of, abortion and a woman's right to choose and everything, but you don't tell one of your children that, we should have had you aborted. That's awful. That is just one of the most gross things that you can say to a child, and I have just no sympathy in my heart for a parent who would do that. Just, gross.
Story 7. When I was in high school, I had this friend, Kathy, not her real name. Kathy was dating Nick, also not his real name, who was known to be a sleaze, dated about every girl in the grade as far as I remember. Well, Kathy found out he was cheating on her with an ex-friend of ours who still ran in the same circle as us, Claire, not her real name. Claire was the average attention seeker, so it made sense to us why she did it. Well, I told Kathy she should dump Nick. She said she will after she cheats on him. She wanted to give him a taste of his own medicine, so I say fine and let her do her thing. Her life and relationships, her choice. So she pretends they was fine for a while, then she cheated on him with another guy, Carl, also not his real name. Plot twist, Carl was dating Claire. Neither of us knew this until after the fact. I still can't get over how it all happened to this day. I'm pretty sure the school had one of those in-school restraining orders placed on them both, so neither of them could get close to each other. But since they were in the special ed class together that only had one classroom, they were kept on opposite sides of the room under strict supervision until Kathy moved.
Hey folks, content warning. This story does contain some discussion about S-abuse, so if you are uncomfortable with that, feel free to skip to the time code the editors hopefully put on screen to jump to the next story.
Story 8. I worked with a guy whose father abandoned the family when he was too young to remember. When his mom died, he went through her papers and found child support checks. He had supported the family until he left the house at 20. Kind of explained why his mom wanted to stay. So he goes to see his father, finds out the guy sending checks wasn't his father. The guy said, "I thought you were mine for 7 years. You were my son in my heart." He then finds out his real father moved in and abused him and physically, went to prison, and died there. The guy tried to like the guy who supported him growing up, but they didn't get along. He said, "I don't know what it is. Either I take after my father and I'm just a prick, or it was the fact that my mom treated me like a dog. I tried, but I couldn't stand the guy who supported me. I just thought he was a moron for spending money on a kid that wasn't his." Story 9. Here's one my aunt and I discovered last year. For privacy's sake, I'll call the people involved A, B, C, and D. Our family friend A has a brother, B. A knows a guy named C who has a sister, D. A and C seem to have an odd relationship, with A sometimes asking C for favors and sometimes saying she never wants to hear from him again. My aunt joked that they fought like an old married couple. Well, A had to have surgery. My aunt and I are talking with B, and he said, A's ex-husband, C, hold up, excuse me, what? We asked B, you mean D's brother, C? And he confirmed that yes, it was the same guy. That answered one question and raised others. A doesn't know that we know and has chosen not to say anything about it. The closest she came was saying C was like a father to her late daughter.
I just have to wonder why this aunt of yours felt the need to hide the fact that she has this ex-husband and that she still, is in contact with him and stuff like that. I don't know. I mean, I guess the reasons could be many, but boy, when I hear stuff like that, I always just worry about the person. Why do you feel the need to hide that? If you feel the need to keep that a secret from family and all that stuff, it's got to kind of weigh on you, doesn't it? Yeah, I hope she's okay.
Story 10. When I went to prom with a group of guy friends, one of whom I'd asked out a year prior, he rejected me. I accidentally matched outfits with a previously mentioned guy who rejected me. He kept making a big deal about how we were matching and kept flirting with me and wanted to take a bunch of pictures with me. Later at the dance, he walks up and starts talking to me with his face covered in lipstick stains that only match our mutual friend Z, who has a boyfriend. Then I left for unrelated reasons. Monday rolls around and Z comes up to me, we share a first hour, and is like, hey, Milk, our mutual guy friend who was matching with you said he wanted to ask you to dance, but he couldn't find the courage to ask you. Then on Wednesday, Z comes up to me again and says, don't tell my boyfriend, but I totally have a crush on our mutual guy friend. Story 11. Here's a plot twist. I was at school this week on Tuesday, and I was eating breakfast with my phone. I thought I lost my phone and someone took it. I spent the whole school day without my phone waiting for someone to return. It was until around 4 in the afternoon I found my phone. Plot twist is my phone was with me the whole time, and I never realized it was in those pouches where you can store water bottles, 2 to be exact, in there, and I placed my phone there thinking it was my normal place I have it. Also, my dad found it with me. Story 12. Grade 7, back in 2013, when being homophobic was the norm in school. Kid makes a homophobic comment, and I ask, what's wrong with being gay? He immediately replies, oh, so you're gay? What? No! Basically, he argues that the only reason I didn't oppose homosexuality was because I was gay. You are either homophobic or homosexual. While my point still stands that you don't have to be gay to not oppose homosexuality, it is still funny that I discovered I was bi during the pandemic and now have a boyfriend.
Oh, yeah. When I was going to, junior high and high school, I was a devout Christian boy. And, if people try to point out, oh, you're gay, if you think that being called, if you think people being homophobic was the norm in 2013 in high school, I promise you the 90s and early 2000s were so much worse. And I was always, even as a Christian, I was very supportive of gay people and everything. My favorite uncle was gay. But I very much denied my now known pansexuality. But yeah, people would be like, oh, what are you, gay? You gay? And yeah, no, turns out, I guess, a little bit.
Story 13, that Ford and Chevy dealership story. In Japan, there's 2 very big publishers of comics. Shueisha, One Piece, Naruto, Bleach, etc. Shogakukan, Ranma 1.5, Inuyasha, Detective Canon, Case Closed. Both employees and even the readers are often in dispute over the best comics from each respective publisher. And as the twist goes, both publishers are founded by the same person. Both are currently public companies. Story 14. I have 3 friends, 2 guys and a girl. The girl is going out with one of the guys, but I start noticing something going on between her and guy 2. I tell guy 1 I think crap's going on between them. I get ganged up on and lose them as friends. 3 years later, it comes out she wasn't cheating on her boyfriend with our other friend. She was sleeping with other friend's stepdad instead. Story 15. A friend cheated on his wife with another friend's wife. Eventually found out. Divorces ensue. Those cheating actually got married. Later on, coincidentally, the two divorced friends of the non-cheaters bumped into each other and decided to get together for coffee to catch up on old times. Now they ended up getting married and everybody's happy. Story 16. I cheated on math exams because I'm bad at math. Well, the teacher found out about my cheating at almost the end of the semester in 2 exams that were important to approve, so I had to learn math. The plot twist? I got good at math in 7 days with only 2-hour classes of practice with my teacher. Now I graduated and I'm going to continue studying.
Honestly, it may just be that you needed to be taught or learn in a slightly different method. There are some folks who the way that a class is structured and the way that it's taught doesn't mesh with them. Different people learn things differently, and maybe in that high pressure and the way that it was being presented to you, things just kind of clicked. So yeah, I'm glad to hear that, and that's maybe a good little note for teachers out there. Hey, sometimes if students don't get it, try a different approach.
Story 17. Not me, but a teacher of mine. He applied to the UNAL, a local university famous for its low acceptance rates and hard acceptance exams, and passed the exam. Then he went to a party to celebrate it. He woke up a week later in Mexico City, and he no longer had a place at the university because he never showed up. Still don't know how he managed to fly to another country so high.
Well, I mean, if you fly too low, you might hit a tree or something.
Story 18. One big plot twist is that my parents knew all the same people in high school. My father and uncle had 2 mutual friends. The crazy thing is that my parents remember going to the same parties and hearing the same conversations, but don't remember the other being there. All this happened in the Twin Cities in Minnesota, which is definitely not a small area. Story 19. I have an uncle. For the longest time, he always talked about how you should be ready for a storm even if the chance is low. I later found out he had been in the military, and one day his base or something got attacked while he was changing. He had to run in front line with no helmet. He now has a book about him called The Shot, a Billy B. story. Story 20. One buddy is a Marine and his wife got pregnant. He was absolutely sure it wasn't his because he'd gotten a vasectomy in college. He kept up appearances, and shortly after the baby was born, he ordered a paternity test. The test came back and said he was the father. His wife didn't find out about the paternity test, and he later learned that vasectomies can heal over, resulting in guys firing live rounds after getting the procedure. Story 21. I work in food delivery, picked up at a restaurant. Uber Eats only gives first name and last initial, not the full name. Check the name on the order, and it's my sister's name and her first initial. It was kind of funny, but I wasn't delivering anywhere near where my sister lives. When I got to the house, who should answer but my sister and a man that is definitely not her husband. My sister isn't married.
Okay. I'm a little bit confused here. So you say your sister isn't married, and she was with a man who's not her husband. So, like, were things found out and now she's, like, divorced or something? Or are you just saying that she's a single person and the plot twist is you found her at a guy's place that she was with, and that seems, I mean, unusual that you happen to get her order, so not normal in that regard, but normal otherwise. I'm a little bit confused here. So, boy, I hope that you're watching this video and you can explain to me what happened, because that last line just makes this seem less of a thing.
Story 22. We were going on holiday to Jersey, and I was tasked with getting the cheapest flights possible. I went through every option I could and found seats on a 5:30 a.m. flight. There were 8 of us on the flight, and we're upgraded to first class. Story 23. Platoon sergeant male has relations with subordinate female, both married. Wife had to drop PS off at work every morning because he had a DUI. PS gets caught and wife kicks him out. Who knew? Story 24. My wife is in the background of a Warped Tour picture I took in 2014. We didn't officially meet until 2019. We lived states away and only met because she was on vacation and we matched on Bumble.
I've heard a story or two that is similar to this on the internet, and it's just kind of amazing because I can be the biggest skeptic in the world for some stuff, but when I hear about stuff like this, it does just give me that little bit of hope that, like, maybe there is fate. Maybe there is a higher power bringing people together. I know it's probably just coincidence and chance, but I don't know. It's just kind of beautiful.
Story 25. Our huge black lab reaching the end of his life. My dad told me he'd be surprised if the dog lasted the summer. Plot twist, my dad suddenly had an aggressive cancer and died within a couple of months. My dad didn't make it past summer, and our dog made it to fall time. Outlived my dad by a couple months. Please leave your story in the comments. I would love to make a video on them in the future. Also, don't forget to like and subscribe.